Merry Christmas, and I know you're probably not ready to hear that, but especially for those of you who won't be with us on Christmas Eve, I hope you have a really meaningful celebration wherever it is that you get to celebrate. Those of you who will be here, it'll be really exciting to see you, and thanks for helping make gatherings possible on what is really one of the busier days of the year. I wanted to do a little bit just kind of calendar work on the front end because we're into this weird season where we break up a lot of our normal routine. So next week, the 22nd, we won't be here. We're in this season where we were actually ready to do gatherings on Sunday this year before Christmas Eve because now Christmas Eve is a Tuesday, and so I've been preparing the staff. And I don't think anybody was here back when when Christmas Eve is a Wednesday, Thursday, then you do it on Sunday, then you come back and you do Christmas Eve on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. So we've been getting ready for that. And then with all the staff transition that we've had, it just seemed the higher form of prudence to go like, no, in the name of putting our best foot forward on the 24th, let's back off of doing the 22nd, so we won't be here on the 22nd. But next year, when Christmas Eve is on a Thursday, we'll be here on the Wednesday or the Sunday before. So all of the staff has agreed they have to be here next year to experience that phenomenon. We actually haven't had that conversation. But so on the 22nd, though, what we are doing, and I'm really, really excited about this. The whole staff is really excited about this. We haven't done this for years, but that evening at 4, or that afternoon, it depends on your age. If you're my age, it's an evening. If you're young, it's an afternoon. But at 4 o'clock, we're going to be at Smoke Jumper at the airport. Paul and Jared, who I think their restaurant has some of the best food in town, if not the best, they're going to cater in. They have a private space there. Kids can get on the luggage carrier thing and go like behind security, in security, behind security. So we'll just run amok for a couple hours. But the idea is if you're an owner around here, if you serve, if you give, if you scatter, if you do one of the three, if you've thought about doing one of the three, if you know it exists and you like buffalo meatballs, we'll be, and there'll be other options too, but we'll be there at 4 o'clock. We'd love for you to join us. And I don't know about you, but sometimes Sunday just feel like the day where you see people that you actually had time to talk to. And so, not that it solves all problems, but we just thought, let's just take a day and just give people a chance to stand around and tell each other Merry Christmas and be there. So hope to see you on the 22nd. You can go skiing that morning or ice skating, whatever it is that's happening up there right now, or biking or whatever it is, and then show up at 4 and we've got food covered. Unless you have teenagers, then we've got appetizers covered. And then on the 29th, we also won't be here because we take the Sunday after Christmas Eve off. And so some of you are thinking, I want to work at Narrate. You guys never work, right? So we're just in that season. So the 29th, we won't be here. And then on the 5th, we will be back here, January 5th, and we're super excited. Justin will be fully rolling on tech stuff. This is Marla's last Sunday, so be sure to tell her goodbye, thank you. She'll be around. And then on the 5th, Tommy will also be here. So he and his wife, Ashley, have started moving here, and Tommy will be leading on the 5th, so we're super excited about that. We're going to start a brand new series called The Fear of Leaving, ironically, not so ironically, and we're really excited for that series, and I'll kick out an email sometime during the break and kind of beginning to tease some things out. We're going to try some new things in January that we're excited for and hopefully give you a chance to form some connection if that's what you're after. This morning, though, what I want to do is continue to pull on that thread that we started pulling on last week. And if you weren't with us last week, that's okay. What we did last week was we started this conversation where more or less what we said is, I wonder if Christmas is maybe the perfect or at least an ideal time to begin to reflect on the fact that the God of the Bible, Jesus, that God, he has a habit of making invitations. And that the way this God works is it's not bound by culture or religion or gender or economic status or any of these things. What we see is this plethora of stories, especially coming together in the Gospels, that this God shows up in the lives of people, including you and I, and just invites us to go deeper, invites us to get healthier, invites us to take another step. And the trickiest thing about this God is it's often not very dramatic. It often sounds like this. It doesn't have all the pomp and circumstance that we're accustomed to, especially in the age of screens. It's often relatively relative. Like if you say yes, someone close to you may not even realize you're saying yes to God in this particular instance. It seems pretty innocuous, like it couldn't possibly be that big of a deal. And yet what we started exploring last week is that the way this story goes and the way the lives of those whom we often admire goes is it's often not like 0 to 100. There's often not one decision that transforms somebody from a person to Mother Teresa. But it's this long journey of obedience. I believe Eugene Peterson even has a book titled that. Someone gave it to me as a gift, a long movement towards obedience. That our heroes, our icons, those people we admire, they're kings and queens of delayed gratification. That in this moment, they say yes to God, and they string those together, that the daily leads to the dream. And I think one way you could think about this, just to kind of sell yourself on the value of this, is look at your own life, look at your own situation, look at your own relationships, look at the things that you value, and I'll bet you some of the people and the circumstances that you hold most near and dear, that there's an initial yes that was involved that you had no idea, you could have had no idea then that this would lead to that. I mean, you could be in a job that you absolutely love, and yet if you're honest, you kind of stumbled into it. You could be in a relationship, and you don't know where you would be without that relationship, and yet you might have rear-ended them at some point. And there was this invitation to be kind and not a jerk. I mean, there's like, what are the instances from your own life where you see this play itself out? I remember my friend David Casey, who's ironically going to lead on Christmas Eve, and we're so excited for that, and frankly, so excited about the story that tells as he works at a Catholic church, and I just love that we just play ball together. But years ago, we were on a run. We used to do half marathons every Monday, which reminds me that I actually am old, because the thought of that now, I'm like, and then I'd have to sleep for a month. But we were running out towards Hart Lane, and we were talking. I think I was working on a relationship series, and we were talking about marriage and all those different things, and I'd asked him something about how he met his wife, Deidre, and he said, Adam, I knew who I married was important, but I had no idea how important it was. And then I remember he stopped, and he looked at me, and it was one of those weird, like, no, you don't make eye contact when you run. It's just awkward. You don't do that. But he stopped, and he looked at me, and he said, I knew Deidre was an amazing woman, but I had no idea how amazing, nor did I know how important that would be to the process. What are those things for you? And what we're saying is, what if this season is a reminder? And God doesn't do it seasonally, he does it all the time, but what we see in the Christmas story is this reminder that God is constantly doing this. I keep losing my cup, and then I see it during the service. That's why there's two, because I've lost two of them. Last week we looked at Mary's story, and this week I just thought as kind of a prompt in this direction, I would read Joseph's story. I didn't put it on the screen. That's not because Anna's sleeping back there. It's because so many of you are so familiar with the story, myself included, that if we started reading it, you'd start thinking about fantasy football or what you're going to eat for lunch, so I'm just going to read it to you. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and he did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he'd considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. Interesting, isn't it, that even then, fear is such a big piece of why we do or don't respond to invitation. She'll give birth to a son, and you're to give him the name Jesus, because he'll save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Now, suppose you could discredit my whole thesis here by going, Adam, that was pretty loud and dramatic. An angel showed up in her room, and she was in his room, and his fiancée was a virgin. And yet, the closer you get to the story, and we're not doing it this year, you're reminded of how easy it would have been for them to go, nah, try the guy across the street. He might say yes, but I'm out. Like, no thanks. So this is kind of where we started. Where I want to nuance it a little bit this morning is last week we looked at the genealogy, and that's the favorite devotional classic of everybody here, so we just thought, let's look at a favorite text, which is a bad joke, but the genealogy, which is this part that we skip in the Bible, what we explored last week is the thing about a genealogy was it was a resume. We live in a hyper-individualistic culture that says if you're important, then put yourself out there, that your accomplishments are a reflection of you. These people understood that they stood on the shoulders of people who stood on the shoulders of people who stood on the shoulders of people, and their credentials were their bloodlines, were their people, their family. And so Matthew's gospel starts with a genealogy, and we're getting to where I want to nuance it here, but let me start where we ended last week, or let me start where we started, and then we'll dig in again. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now remember, this isn't an exhaustive genealogy. This is a storyteller taking facts and arranging them in such a way and leaving some stuff in and adding other stuff in order to tell a story. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. So we talked at length last week, Tamar, a Gentile, a prostitute, and a woman. Nuance. Matthew's doing something. What's he doing? Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahashon, Nahashon the father of Solomon, Solomon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Second woman, prostitute, Gentile. What's she doing there? Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Gentile, who wasn't a prostitute, but she did take off some shoes, if you know the context there. So she had her own kind of stuff. Obed, the father of Jesse, that's kind of mean. There's an idiom there where she took off Boaz's shoe, which basically means she went and seduced him by most accounts. And Jesse, the father of King David. Now, here's where I want to pick up. So where we ended last week was this God invites people, even Gentiles, even women, even prostitutes, and there's room for anybody in his story who says yes to God. And God will pick you up where you're at, and he'll move you relative to your willingness to be moved. Now watch this. David was the father of Solomon, and here's the line I wanted to shine the light on here this morning, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. There's some nuance there, right? And there's the technical response to that is, what the heck? So Tamar, whose mother was Tamar, whose mother was Rahab, whose mother was Ruth, and then we get to this situation, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. That's weird. It's really weird. Well, who's David? Raises a few questions, I think. Who's David? Who's Uriah? And who's Uriah's wife? Well, some of you will know and others won't. David he's the man. He's the Michael Jordan of Israel's history. He's the second king, but he's the great king. He's the king that they thought ought to show up again. They weren't looking for some passive lamb-carrying Messiah like Jesus. They were looking for somebody who knew his way around with a sword. David was that guy. His son was going to be the next Messiah. Well, who is Uriah? Well, Uriah, not so ironically, was a Gentile, a mercenary, which is to say that much like some of our popular shows today, Uriah had been hired by Israel to work in and lead and fight among Israel's army, but he wasn't among them. And who was his wife? Well, her name was Bathsheba. And here's the story. I'm just going to jump into 1 Samuel 11, and just because there's a context, Matthew, the author here, who, remember, he was a tax collector. He was told, don't bother coming to synagogue. Your type aren't welcome here. He was that guy. He's putting together a genealogy full of those people, if you will. And here's the story he would have assumed you and I would know. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israel army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So there's really wants you to retain is David's back home when everybody else is gone. There's some debate biblically, was that okay? Was it not okay? It seems kind of hard to prove either way in my view. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. Now, let's just stop there for just a second, because depending on your level of biblical nuance and study, this is the subject of great debate. There's lots of stuff lying in the margins that we don't know here, and it's fun to speculate about, but at the end of the day, we don't know. We don't know to what degree David knew this woman. We don't know how exactly he saw her. Was she also on the roof? Was he seeing her through a window? Was she behind some kind of a curtain? Was she there in all of her glory? We don't exactly know what's going on there. What we know is what we're told. And it's not that it's not appropriate to think about this, but here we go. Then David sent out messengers to get her. Oh, wait, I think I skipped a line. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And you have to imagine living next to the White House, but having the White House not know who you are. So there's something going on here that's story behind the story, because of course they would have known someone who lived in that kind of proximity to David's palace. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now, here's what else we don't know. We don't know to what degree this was consensual. And again, a topic of great debate is this a classic case of male coercion? Is this rape? Is this consensual? Is it mutual? We really don't know. We can speculate. We don't know. What we do know is that now what she was doing was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanliness. Then she went back home, and then the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I'm pregnant. So here's something else we know. We know that political scandal, if not corruption, is not a new idea. We know that powerful men using their power to their own ends is not a new phenomenon. We know that there's a danger that comes with this inherent beautiful thing called sexuality, and sometimes it's us at our worst. What we know is that David, in an effort to cover his butt, called Uriah back home, left the guys in the field, called Uriah back home, thought, I'll liquor him up a little bit, then I'll send him home. He hasn't seen his wife in a while, and they'll do their thing. But ironically, what David didn't anticipate, and this is, I think, one of the nuances Matthew's exposing, David, the great king of Israel, was trying to manipulate the situation. Uriah, the Gentile, was so honorable that he refused to enjoy that pleasure while his guys were laying out in the field. So he slept outside that night. Then David, being a man trapped by his own decisions, used his power in the next option that he had, best he could tell, and that was he arranged for Uriah to be put out in the front lines of battle. He was killed. That made poor Bathsheba a widow. He was able to marry her, and eventually they had another son who became Solomon. Again, the question is, what the heck? And why is this in the genealogy? I just finished a book, a historical fiction book. I forget the guy's name, but it was about the Revolutionary War. It was very, very fascinating. I learned lots of things about George Washington. I learned lots of things about people I didn't even know were so important, like General Greene and Lafayette. Now I understand why that name's everywhere, especially in the East. But guess what wasn't in the book? 550 pages of Revolutionary War and the characters. Guess what wasn't in there? Let's start with the fact that Washington owned slaves. Not there. Guess what else wasn't in there? Like Greene's worst moments where he flew off the handle and treated people unkindly. Guess what else wasn't in there? Like Lafayette's dirty laundry. It raises this question, what is Matthew doing? Why is the story in there? And to answer that question, I think one thing we can do is ask another question, but to do that, I've got to grab something. So, this is when I want to do this. Sorry. Okay. I need you to, Justin told me I need to get it. There you go. It's in YouTube. Thank you, Justin. Okay. I need 10 Bible characters, preferably Old Testament. If you would avoid Joel, that would be helpful because we don't know who he is. So, just 10 characters as they come to mind. Noah, Isaiah, Jonah, Moses. Why? We are a Gentile lot, both services. Like Jacob, nope. Nebuchadnezzar, both times. It's hilarious. I love it. Maybe it's just because it's fun to say it. I don't know how to spell it. Elijah. Who else? Jeremiah. Bob? Did someone say that? What? Hosea. Okay. Hannah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Rachel.
Abraham. Okay, I'm sorry. In case you wondered if I was sexist, I just went Abraham, not Rachel. Sorry. I'll do Rachel too. I wasn't trying to do that. Okay, so Noah slept with his daughter, as I recall. Isaiah, honestly not familiar enough. Jonah, so full of himself and so, what would we call it, just like arrogant about his own system that he was refusing to God to go share God's message with another culture and people. Moses committed murder. Nebuchadnezzar was Nebuchadnezzar. Elijah had this whiny moment where he was like, God, I'm the only person on the whole planet who loves you. It's funny, that doesn't happen anymore, but it happened then. Jeremiah, I just have to admit a decent amount of arrogance there. I can't air his dirty laundry. Isn't Hosea Jones, right? Isn't he married a woman who was herself all kinds of trouble? Do I have the right character there? Hannah, I really like Hannah. I don't have any dirt on Hannah. Abraham, like one time his life was in danger, and so the way he could save himself was to go, oh no, she's not my wife. You could have her as yours. Go ahead, take her. And he did that. Yeah, twice. Thank you. Not that anyone's counting. And Rachel, I don't have any dirt on her. 1. I did slashes next to all of them. I just ruined my system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know how you do what you do with the Hosea thing. Well, at least 6 of the 11. And of course, there's far more examples that are the rule than the exception. Question: why do we have a sacred text that's so full of dirt? So full of like, ooh, that's embarrassing. I mean, you've got David and Moses, or in Jesus' culture, as I understand it was Moses and David. David, we got all kinds of dirt on David. Moses, their great leader, long before he was the great leader, was the murderer who then went and hung out with a bunch of Gentile people for a good portion of his life. What's going on here? One more question. And I think to ask this, I got to do something weird. So I need your permission to do something weird. Okay, so bring out the chickens. Here's my question. This is a little weird. If you've never been to church, you're like never going to be back here again. There's lots of great churches in town because they won't make you do this. But I promise I'm not going to make you turn to anybody or talk to anybody or do anything. But there's a question that I want to ask. And if your answer is yes, just for a brief moment, you can close your eyes if you want to. That would be weird. Don't close your eyes. But if your answer is yes, I just want you to stand up, okay? For how many of you, be it yours or your parents or your grandparents, for how many of you is sexual misconduct a part of your story? If so, stand up. Now let me ask you this question. Why are we saying this line that I can't even memorize because it's so stinking weird? Whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Go ahead, you can sit down. See, here's what we know about Jewish genealogies. Part of what we know is they weren't about you, and they weren't about your family. They were about God. These were a people who understood they came from nowhere. They were the underdog. They were where did you come from? How did you get to the hill country of Judah? Like, who are you? They saw a genealogy as evidence of the faithfulness of God. Why? Because they saw a God whose story was bigger than their own. What if part of what's going on here is this concerted effort on the part of the tax collector who'd been told his whole life, you don't fit in here. What if part of what's going on here is his wanting to make this very loud statement that God uses people warts and all. Not who are flippant, not who are indifferent, not who don't ultimately acknowledge God, but people who have them, who make their mistakes, and who over time come to a place where they acknowledge Him. What if this God invites and this God whispers, irrespective of your embarrassing past? And what if in a culture that was so predicated, frankly, upon some family arrogance? Remember, Jesus dealt with this all the time. He's like, listen, if you think it's all about your bloodlines, God could raise up somebody out of a rock. What if the irony of all this then is Matthew demonstrating, no. God is constantly calling people, warts and all, to be a part of His story. Which would get at the second piece. What if that's the other important nuance to this? All are welcome, but I believe it was Louis Giglio who said it first. The story already has a star, and he's not you, and it's not me, and it's not Narrate, and it's not the United States of America. The story already has a star, and it's God. It's the Holy. And I wonder if this isn't present in Moses' story. I have a bias. This is probably my ultimate framing narrative for me in the text. Moses, He develops a passion and a vision for these people. He says, you're my people. I'm going to start a revolution. I'm going to be great. They'll make bronze statues of me. He goes to start a revolution. It doesn't work. It becomes murder, which is the difference between a revolution and murder, is nobody followed him. He runs out into the desert. He spends 40 years tuck-tailed, working and living among a non-Israelite culture, among some people he had never met. He reestablishes his family. God shows up when he's 80 years old and says, hey, Moses, guess what? I've heard the cry. And now I'm picking you. And Moses says what? My opinion is this is such an important part of the narrative. His response to God is what? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Here's my question. Is that a question Moses was capable of asking when he was 40? Or would Moses' response at 40 would have been like, hell yeah, it's about time you asked. Like, was he even capable of that mindset at 40? And is part of the irony, part of the divine timing of this, because God's response isn't like, oh, but Moses, you're the man. It's what? I'll be with you. You're right, Moses. Finally you get it. This isn't about you. This is about me. Listen, I don't know where the invitations are coming for you. I don't know in what areas you feel prompted. I just know, listen, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm as guilty as probably most, but I'm definitely developing this sensitivity to, we live in such a hyper-individualized culture that if we're not careful, every right thing we do is ultimately about us. We don't go to the gym so that we can serve people more effectively longer. We go to the gym because we want abs. We don't read the Bible because we want to be a better servant that after. And I'm sorry, that sounds a little accusative. I'm saying it in the mirror, though I'm not hopeful that I'll ever have abs. Like, what if the reminder is, you're right, you don't need to be perfect because it's not about you. You know, here's where I think John the Baptist, and I'll end here, I think John the Baptist is maybe one of the most overlooked heroes in the text, and it's because of the perspective that he brings. If you're not familiar, remember, John the Baptist was, you want to talk about royal bloodlines. Well, not royal, but priestly. He was able to, both cards, mom and dad came from these temple servant, we would call it royal, they would call it priestly lines. And yet John the Baptist, when he came of age, when he went to work, when he got his degree, when he picked up his lunch pail, he didn't go to the temple, he went to the middle of nowhere, to the wilderness, to this rugged territory. I've been studying under a professor who's convinced that part of what's going on there is this concerted effort to go, no. The faith of Abraham, the faith of Moses, it didn't have all this stuff. It was raw and gritty, and it was out there, and it was in the wilderness, and it didn't come with all of the stuff. And John the Baptist started just talking about God and talking about repentance and talking about there's a star in the story and it's not you, and it doesn't matter what you've done to ruin your life. God will use you. And people were coming, and then before long, it wasn't just the country bumpkins like you and I. I don't know how many times I've said to candidates in this interview process, I'm just a hick from the sticks, man. Because I don't feel like that, but when you start talking to people who live in Atlanta, I'm just a hick. Pretty soon it's not just the hicks, no offense, coming to see him, but it's people, it's the intelligentsia, it's the elites, it's the people from Jerusalem, and John's preaching the same message over and over and over, and they're getting a little threatened because he's figured out a way to do this God thing without all of this kind of corruption and stuff, and then Jesus comes along, and John, and this is the part that I think is amazing, and if you've ever been successful at anything in your life, I think it's good to slow down and appreciate what happened here. Jesus shows up, and he starts being better at it than John. And John's like, he's the man. In fact, he takes some of his best and brightest followers and he goes, you ought to go follow Jesus because I'm a dude, that's God. And as best I can tell, some people doing the things that we often do, they show up in John's life in order to kind of get, to kind of sandbag of man, this must stink, right? Suddenly Jesus he's stealing your thunder. And John says this, and this would be worth maybe even reading as you move towards Advent, this whole chapter about John the Baptist. But John says this, a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. What is that? It's this recognition of, Abram was just Abram. He's Abraham because God invited and he said yes, but it's about God. My wife and I got to have dinner with John Molyneux, the Love Justice founder that spoke here a few weeks ago, and there was a point. I'm just fascinated at how somebody with such a massive organization that reaches globally, that's doing so much good, I'm just curious. I was curious how they raise funds for something like that, and I asked him something to that question, and he said, Adam, the only thing I can tell you is this: every time I cling to something, I crush it in my hands and it crumbles. And when I just take a light, loose grip, and I'm paraphrasing on the second part, when I take a light, loose grip, God just does things. It's John the Baptist going, boy, this is a tricky, I'm in a different season, but it's not about me. And then he does this weird thing about marriage that would take minutes to explain because I have to stop and read it backwards and forward and upside down every time because it's such a cultural thing. But then he ends with this: he must become greater, and I must become less. What if that's what's going on with Uriah? What is the line? Man, it's hard to memorize. Whose mother had been Uriah's wife. So I guess here's the nuance that I wanted to bring to the floor as you move towards Christmas and think about 2020 and the myriad opportunities and responsibilities and invitations and pains that you have. On the one hand, this God invites. And I hope we've provoked you to step more and more into that. But the second part of it is he invites you into a story that's not about you. It's not about me, and frankly, it's not even about Narrate. It's about this bigger thing. And you want to talk about subjective, like that's you and God work, that's really hard for anybody else to do for you. You head off to the gym, you get up to read your Bible, you turn off your phone to do something else. It's entirely subjective. That's a you and God thing. A God who invites you into his story, but a God who also invites you into his story. So I'd like to pray, and then the lovely Annie and Aaron are going to sing another song. God, thanks, Lord, for the way that you nuance our lives and invite us into the specifics. And thanks, Lord, in this room there's just an infinite number of amazing stories, which right now are confronted with even more amazing invitations. And God, I pray that you'd be very real in this season, that not every invitation is even a mandate, that sometimes the best yes is a no. God, that you would help us understand the way you're leading us, whether that's in middle school or high school or college, or as we fight for our lives in our 90s. We love you, God. Amen.
If you would like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook and Instagram.